The small town of Willowbrook was a place where everyone knew each other's names, and the streets were lined with familiar faces. It was a community where nothing ever seemed out of place, where the air felt safe, and the days moved at a steady pace. Among its residents, there were a few who stood out more than others, and one of them was Coach Eric Matthews. Eric had been the head coach of the Willowbrook High cheerleading squad for several years, and during that time, he had become something of a local hero. His presence at the school was commanding, but in a way that made people admire him rather than fear him. He was tall, with a strong build and a warm smile that seemed to make anyone around him feel comfortable. His dedication to the squad was unquestionable, and the cheerleaders loved him. At the heart of the team was Emily Harris, a bright and talented cheerleader who had been with the squad since her freshman year. Emily was the embodiment of grace and strength. She was beautiful, with long, flowing brown hair and eyes that sparkled when she smiled. Emily was everything the town admired, perfect in every way. She excelled academically, was the captain of the cheerleading squad, and had a personality that made her adored by both peers and adults alike. Her parents were proud of her, and she was the kind of young woman that everyone expected great things from. Yet, as perfect as she seemed on the outside, something was brewing beneath the surface, something that no one could see, not even her closest friends. Eric had taken an interest in Emily from the moment she joined the squad. Her raw talent had immediately caught his eye, and he knew she had the potential to be the star of the team. It wasn't just her cheerleading skills that impressed him, though. It was the way she carried herself, confident, driven, and always eager to learn. Eric found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. He had been a coach for years and had seen many talented athletes come and go, but there was something about Emily that seemed different. It wasn't long before their connection grew stronger, and their professional relationship began to evolve into something much more personal. It started with small gestures, casual conversations after practice, sharing a coffee at a local diner, and a few private words of encouragement that lasted longer than they should have. To the outside world, it appeared as nothing more than a coach helping his most talented athlete. But in the quiet moments they shared, it became clear that there was something deeper between them. Emily, too, felt the pull. She was flattered by Eric's attention and genuinely enjoyed his company. Over time, their conversations became more intimate, and what started as a professional connection soon became something more. They found themselves meeting in secret, their interactions growing more frequent as they shared moments of vulnerability. Emily began to confide in Eric about her personal life, about the pressure she faced both at school and at home. Eric, who had been a father figure to so many of his students, now appeared to offer a different kind of guidance, one that was far from innocent. As their connection deepened, Emily found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, unsure of where the boundaries of their relationship lay. What had started as a simple coach-athlete mentorship had blurred into something that neither of them could control. They were both aware of the danger of their relationship, but neither could seem to pull away. Meanwhile, the people around them remained oblivious. The cheerleading squad continued to perform flawlessly, and Eric continued to be praised as the dedicated coach who led them to victory. Emily remained the perfect captain, always smiling, always the star. But underneath it all, the secret they shared was becoming harder to keep, and the consequences of their actions would soon be impossible to ignore. The search for Emily Harris grew more desperate with each passing day. As her absence stretched into the second week, the town of Willowbrook began to sink into a collective state of anxiety. Emily had been a beloved member of the community, intelligent, vibrant, and full of promise. She was a role model, a cheerleader whose smile lit up the room. Her disappearance felt like a cruel twist of fate that no one could fully grasp. Friends, family, and even strangers rallied together to search for her, posting flyers, organizing volunteer teams, and keeping hope alive. But despite their efforts, the search yielded nothing, and the police were no closer to finding her. Detective Sarah Miller and Detective James Harlow were assigned to the case. At first, it seemed like a typical missing person investigation. Someone had gone missing, and they had to figure out where she had gone and why. However, as the days wore on, it became evident that Emily's case was anything but ordinary. The more the detectives spoke to people who knew her, the more they began to uncover troubling details about Emily's life, things that didn't quite add up. One of the first places the detectives focused on was the cheerleading team, where Emily had spent most of her time. The squad was a tight-knit group, but the more the detectives spoke to the girls, the more a sense of unease emerged. Emily had been acting differently in the days leading up to her disappearance. She had withdrawn from her teammates, becoming distant and preoccupied. It was out of character for someone who had once been the glue holding the team together. Her friends noticed that she had become increasingly agitated, always glancing over her shoulder, as though she feared something or someone was watching her. The detectives soon learned that Emily's behavior had been tied to one person, Coach Eric Matthews. Eric was well known in Willowbrook, not just for his role as the cheerleading coach, but also for being a charismatic figure in the community. He was respected and admired by many, often seen as a mentor to the young girls on the squad. But as Sarah and James began to dig deeper, they started to uncover a different side to Eric, a side that was far more sinister. They found that Emily had been spending a lot of time with Eric in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. It wasn't unusual for a coach to spend extra time with a dedicated student, but the nature of their relationship raised red flags. Emily had become closer to Eric than she had with any of her teammates. She had started to confide in him about personal matters, and Eric, in turn, had taken an unusual interest in her well-being. Some of the cheerleaders recalled instances where Eric seemed overly protective of Emily, intervening when other team members tried to get too close to her. His behavior towards her had become possessive, and Emily had seemed to become more and more uncomfortable with it. The detectives' suspicions were further fueled when they found a series of text messages between Emily and her best friend, Lily, in the days before her disappearance. Emily had been sending cryptic messages that hinted at something being wrong. "I don't know what to do anymore," one of the texts read. "He's making me feel like I'm losing control." The messages were filled with fear and uncertainty, and it became clear that Emily had been struggling with her relationship with Eric. It seemed as though she was trying to break free from him but didn't know how. The detectives also discovered that Emily had been planning to confront Eric. She had confided in Lily that she was going to tell the truth about their relationship, whatever it was, and expose what she felt was an unhealthy dynamic between them. The day she disappeared was supposed to be the day Emily planned to confront him. She had gathered her courage, determined to put an end to the secret she had been keeping. But something had gone terribly wrong. The investigation into Emily's disappearance had taken a dark turn. Sarah and James had found their first real lead, but it wasn't enough. They still had no clear idea of what had happened to Emily after she left her house that night. The only thing they knew for certain was that something had happened between her and Coach Matthews. As the detectives continued to follow the trail of evidence, they couldn't shake the growing feeling that Emily's disappearance was just the beginning. There was a darkness lurking beneath the surface of the town, and they were about to uncover it. The deeper they went, the more they realized that Emily's murder was not an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger, more sinister story, one that had been hidden for far too long. The town of Willowbrook had never seen anything like it. Emily Harris, the star cheerleader, was missing. The day after the cheerleading team's final competition, there was an eerie silence at the school. Students wandered the hallways, talking in hushed tones, while faculty members exchanged worried glances. Emily had been a fixture in the town, always at the center of attention, always in the spotlight. But now, she was gone without a trace. It started with the phone calls. Emily's mother, worried when her daughter didn't return home after practice, began calling her friends and teammates. No one knew where she was. She wasn't answering her phone, and her social media accounts had gone silent. As the hours passed, concern turned into panic. By the time evening came, Emily's family had reported her missing. The police began to search the area, hoping for some clue as to where she had gone. But the search didn't lead them anywhere. The longer they searched, the more hopeless the situation seemed. It was as if Emily had simply vanished. The cheerleading team, who had always been a close-knit group, began to fall apart. They were devastated by the news, unsure of how to process the disappearance of their beloved captain. No one could comprehend how someone as vibrant and full of life as Emily could simply disappear. The girls tried to stay strong for each other, but they were consumed by fear. Emily had always been the one who held the team together, and now, without her, they felt lost. Days turned into weeks with no sign of Emily. The investigation seemed to stall as the police scoured every possible lead. Detective Sarah Miller and Detective James Harlow took over the case, determined to uncover the truth behind Emily's disappearance. Their first step was to trace her last known whereabouts. They discovered that Emily had been last seen leaving the gym late one evening, around the same time that Coach Eric Matthews had finished his practice with the team. At first, the connection seemed insignificant, but as they looked deeper into the footage, something unsettling caught their attention. Eric Matthews, always a charismatic and well-liked coach, had been seen leaving the gym just minutes after Emily. There was no sign of anyone else around, no one to witness what had happened in those critical hours after practice. The detectives dug further into Eric's background, and what they found began to raise alarms. Eric had a spotless reputation in the community. He was known for his commitment to the cheerleading squad, and he was well liked by the students and their parents. But the more they looked, the more they began to uncover. There were rumors of inappropriate behavior, whispered conversations about the coach's unusually close relationships with some of the cheerleaders. No one had ever come forward with solid evidence, and the accusations had always been dismissed as baseless gossip. But as the investigation into Emily's disappearance deepened, the detectives started to wonder if there was more to these rumors than anyone had realized. The breakthrough came when the police discovered Emily's phone hidden in the woods, not far from the school. It had been destroyed, but forensic experts managed to recover some deleted messages and photos. One message stood out, a text sent from Emily to a close friend just hours before she vanished. The message was brief but chilling. "I'm scared. I can't keep this secret anymore." The detectives were stunned. What secret had Emily been referring to? And why had she been afraid? The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but they still lacked the crucial piece that would explain her disappearance. As Maria sat there, holding the letter in her trembling hands, 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. She wondered if this had been going on for longer than she had realized, if Lily's influence had slowly seeped into every corner of their lives. Had Giulio been hiding his true feelings all along? Was he really still the man she had married, or had he been changed by someone else? The weight of the discovery was almost unbearable. The need to confront Giulio was overwhelming, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that the truth would only hurt her more. She was trapped in a web of betrayal, and there was no easy way out. As the hours passed, Maria found herself unable to focus on anything else. The letter had shattered her sense of security, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. She knew she couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine, but she also knew that confronting Giulio wouldn't be simple. The man she loved had become someone she didn't recognize. That evening, Maria decided to approach Giulio. She waited until after dinner, when they were alone in the living room. Her hands were clammy, her heart racing. She didn't know how to begin, but she couldn't stay silent any longer. As she held the letter in front of him, she watched his face shift from confusion to guilt. Giulio knew, at that moment, that the truth had been exposed. He had no choice but to admit what he had been hiding. The conversation that followed was painful, filled with accusations and sorrow. Giulio denied that he had ever intended for things to go this far, but his words seemed hollow. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that he had allowed this situation to spiral out of control, that he had chosen to turn a blind eye to Lily's obsession rather than confront it head-on. He apologized, of course, but it was too little, too late. The damage had already been done. Maria's mind raced with the consequences of everything she had learned. She realized that she had been living in a false reality, where her trust had been broken in the most unexpected way. As she listened to Giulio's explanations, she felt a cold distance growing between them, a distance that could never be bridged. The love that had once been so strong between them now felt fragile, and the future she had imagined for herself seemed uncertain. As the night went on, Maria couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The realization that Lily's obsession was more than just a passing crush left her terrified. This wasn't something that would disappear on its own, it was a force that had already begun to tear her life apart. What was worse, Maria knew that the end of this story was still far from over. The darkest chapters were yet to come. Maria's confrontation with Giulio had left her feeling hollow, as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into an abyss. The emotional toll of discovering the depth of his betrayal was more than she could bear. It wasn't just his emotional neglect, it was the realization that he had let Lily's obsession with him grow unchecked. Every fiber of Maria's being screamed for her to end it, to walk away from a marriage that was now tainted with lies. But the thought of leaving everything behind, the home they had built, their daughter, the life they had once shared, was an impossible burden to bear. In the days that followed, Maria withdrew into herself. She didn't want to speak to Giulio, and she certainly didn't want to hear his excuses. Instead, she focused all her energy on finding a way to protect her family. She knew that Lily's obsession was no passing phase, it was a dangerous force that wouldn't be easily dismissed. But what Maria didn't expect was that her own father-in-law, Don Carlos, would become entangled in this web of deceit. Don Carlos had always been a domineering presence in their lives, and Maria had hoped that, in this moment of crisis, he might offer support. Instead, she found herself facing a man who seemed more interested in controlling the situation than in helping her. When she confided in him about Lily's actions and the emotional strain on her marriage, Don Carlos didn't offer sympathy. Instead, he looked at her with a coldness that took her by surprise. Rather than offering solutions or even comforting words, Don Carlos suggested that Maria should just accept the situation, that Giulio's actions were not as serious as she made them out to be. He dismissed Lily's obsession as nothing more than youthful infatuation, something that would pass in time. Maria was taken aback by his response, shocked by how easily he seemed to shrug off the betrayal of his own son. But as their conversation progressed, it became clear that Don Carlos had his own motives. He didn't care about the emotional devastation his son's actions had caused. What mattered to him was control. In a moment of brutal honesty, Don Carlos revealed that he had been aware of the growing tension between Giulio and Lily for some time. He had even encouraged it, seeing in Lily a way to gain more influence over Giulio. It was clear to Maria now that Don Carlos wasn't concerned with saving her marriage, he was using the situation to manipulate his son into doing his bidding. It was all a game to him, a game where emotions and lives were mere pawns. The realization that her father-in-law had known about Lily's feelings and had, in fact, encouraged them, struck Maria like a blow to the chest. She had trusted him, looked to him for guidance, but in truth he had only been interested in his own gain. This was not the man she had thought him to be. She now saw him as the true architect of the betrayal she had endured, a man whose manipulations had stretched far beyond what she had ever imagined. Maria knew that she couldn't turn to Don Carlos for help any longer. She had been left alone to face the consequences of her family's dysfunction. She realized, with a cold clarity, that if she wanted to save herself and her daughter, she would have to take matters into her own hands. There could be no more pretending, no more sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of family. She had already lost too much. The pressure of dealing with her father-in-law's betrayal weighed heavily on Maria. As if that weren't enough, she still had to contend with Lily, whose presence seemed to haunt every corner of her life. Maria knew that confronting Lily directly would only make matters worse. The young woman was obsessed, unhinged by her feelings for Giulio, and Maria had no idea how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. With no one left to turn to, Maria made a decision that would change the course of everything. She couldn't let Lily continue to haunt her family, and she certainly couldn't allow her father-in-law's manipulations to destroy her any further. If she were going to regain control over her life, she would have to act decisively. But as Maria began to plot her next steps, she felt a growing sense of dread. She had no idea just how far Lily and Don Carlos would go to protect their twisted plans, and a terrifying thought lingered in her mind. Was she truly prepared for what would happen next? The chilling truth was that Maria was no longer fighting for her marriage, she was fighting for her life. Maria's resolve to take control of her life grew stronger with each passing day. She no longer felt the same fear that had once paralyzed her. The layers of betrayal she had uncovered had cracked open the door to a new reality, one where she could no longer rely on the very people she had trusted. Giulio's betrayal was one thing, but the realization that Don Carlos had been orchestrating much of the chaos left her feeling like a pawn in a game she never agreed to play. She had to protect herself, and more importantly, her daughter Lily, from the havoc that was about to unfold. The days that followed were filled with tension as Maria prepared herself for a confrontation she knew would be inevitable. She couldn't ignore the fact that her life was hanging by a thread. The situation with Giulio and Lily was only getting worse, and every time Maria thought she might find some resolution, she was faced with another obstacle. Her mind raced as she thought of ways to make sure that she and her daughter were safe from the tangled web of manipulation and obsession that surrounded them. One evening, Maria decided to confront Lily. She had no illusions that this would be an easy conversation, but she knew it had to happen. If she didn't stop Lily from pushing further into her family's life, the consequences could be catastrophic. Maria had already begun to notice small, unsettling signs of Lily's fixation, unexpected messages, hidden glances, and the increasing frequency of her presence in their lives. Lily wasn't going to just walk away. She was determined to take everything from Maria. Maria arranged to meet Lily at a local cafe, a neutral place where they could talk without the interference of Giulio or Don Carlos. When Lily arrived, her smile was tight, as if she had been expecting this confrontation for a long time. There was no warmth in her expression, only a cold, calculated determination. Maria's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to back down. She knew she couldn't show any fear now. As they sat across from each other, Maria wasted no time. She told Lily that she knew the truth, that she had discovered the letter, and that she was fully aware of the depth of her obsession with Giulio. Lily's response was chilling. Rather than showing any remorse or understanding, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that sent a shiver down Maria's spine. Lily admitted everything: her feelings for Giulio, her plans to take him away from Maria, and her belief that she deserved to be the one by his side. She told Maria that she would never give up, that Giulio was hers, and Maria was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Maria listened, her anger and pain rising with each word, but she remained calm. She knew that if she reacted, if she let the emotions take over, she would lose control. The meeting was a surreal one, a battle of wills that left both women standing on the edge of a precipice. Maria knew that this wasn't just a matter of saving her marriage, it was about protecting her family from someone who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. But as Maria began to realize the true extent of Lily's obsession, she also understood that she was dealing with someone dangerous. This wasn't just a love triangle, it was a twisted game of power, where only one person could come out on top, and Lily was willing to do whatever it took to win. Maria left the cafe with a heavy heart. She knew that the worst was yet to come, but she wasn't about to give up. She had already lost so much, and she wasn't about to lose her daughter or her sanity in the process. The confrontation with Lily had been a wake-up call, a stark reminder that things were spiraling out of control. It wasn't just her marriage that was at stake anymore, it was her entire future. As the days dragged on, Maria knew she had to act quickly. She couldn't allow Giulio or Don Carlos to continue their games, and she couldn't trust that the authorities would do anything to stop Lily's growing obsession. Maria knew that if she was going to get out of this alive, she needed to be strategic, to play the game on her terms. She began to gather evidence, to document everything she could about Lily's actions and Don Carlos' manipulation. The more she uncovered, the more she realized just how deep the rot went. Maria had become a woman transformed. No longer the quiet, passive wife, she was now a force to be reckoned with. As she prepared for the final confrontation that would seal her fate, she understood one truth above all. She couldn't count on anyone else to save her. It was up to her alone to protect her family and to stop the madness that had consumed her life. The storm was coming and Maria was ready. But she had no idea just how far Lily and Don Carlos were willing to go to keep their twisted hold on everything she loved. The final act of this tragic drama would unfold soon, and no one would walk away unscathed.